Hey guys, what's going on? It's John Hamilton. We're going to start off week one with what is this flight stuff, anyways. It's good to meet everybody last week. If you don't remember, like I said, my name's John Hamilton. I'm one of the co-directors of this future flight crew thing that you guys are getting into. Tonight for your first, it's tonight here, it's about 10:05 when I'm recording this for this year. I'm just going to start off with a brief overview of what helicopter EMS is, what the flight world looks like, and what you guys are getting into. So bear with me for the recording. Tonight should be fairly simple and short. And then we'll have a good discussion next week. So looking forward to getting into this stuff. So what is this flight stuff? Tonight I'm going to talk about how helicopters and flight medicine works in pre-hospital care. I'm going to define what your roles would be as a flight crew. I'm going to talk about the modes of transportation. What I mean by that is when we talk about flight paramedics and nurses, we usually associate that with helicopters, and that is not the case. And then we're going to talk about the different program models throughout the country. There are several, some better than others in my opinion, and you're going to figure that out real quick. I'm very opinionated. I'll tell you why I think the way I do and let you form your own opinion. We'll talk a little bit about HEMS models throughout the world. There's some other countries doing things differently than we do here. Maybe a little bit for the better, for worse. And then we're going to look at what I think the future of helicopter EMS in the United States is going to look like. So where did it all start? I'm not one to read PowerPoints to you guys. This stuff is in here as bullet points for y'all to read yourself and kind of keep me on track. But the first air ambulance flight was done allegedly in a hot air balloon in Paris in 1870-something. I think really where it took off for the United States was the Korean War. The United States Army started using helicopters. If you guys have ever watched the show MASH, the dust-off units that's in Vietnam, that show is kind of revolved around those. They would strap a patient to the outside of the helicopter in like a wire mesh, kind of sketchy little patient carrier. That's kind of where it all started. To this day, there's still some kind of back and forth about who was the actual first service in the United States, but from all my research that I've done and the folks that I know and have talked to, I give credit to Flight for Life in Denver, Colorado. They started in 1972, and then several programs kind of blossomed thereafter. So Herman Memorial Life Flight in Texas, they're a legacy program here in Texas where I am. They started fairly soon after the Colorado program. Air Evac Life Team actually started, I think, in 1985 in Missouri. Care Flight, where I work now, started in 1979. We're the second oldest flight program in Texas, and one of the first in the country, which is pretty cool. Maryland State Police followed soon thereafter, and then a program in LA out in California were all some of the very first programs for helicopter EMS in the United States. Where we are today from there is very much different. As of 2019, this is the most recent data I could find. There's over 1,200 air medical bases throughout the United States. That number is shrinking. I will get into the reason why that is here in towards the end of the program or the presentation. But that's a ton. There's over 550,000 flights completed each year, and that's 2019 data. So COVID did a number to us in 2020 and 2021. So those flights, likely that number went up, but as of the making of this presentation, this was the best data that I could find. And then the big three is what I call them. There's three very large programs in the United States that are for-profit HEMS operators. Air Methods on their website will tell you that they are the largest single air medical provider in the country. PHI stands for Petroleum Helicopters Incorporated. They got their start by flying people to oil platforms out in the Gulf of Mexico. Some of their investors decided that the air medical world was a cool little side venture to get into, and that kind of blossomed into one of the larger programs in the country. And then Global Medical Response, GMR is what they are kind of called. They own several for-profit companies that you guys are probably familiar with, such as Air Evac Life Team, Medtrans, Reach out in California. Guardian Flight has a big presence in the Arizona kind of area of the country. And then AirMed International is a fixed-wing international jet service that does the longer range kind of transports. So single-engine helicopters versus twin-engine helicopters are what you guys are going to be working in mostly, because there's no such thing as anything else. But these are kind of the main aircraft that are flown, helicopter EMS, both types of each. So Air Evac Life Team flies a large fleet of a Bell 206, if you guys are familiar with that company. They also are starting to transition to 407s and other aircraft because 206 isn't made anymore. So we'll get into that on the next slide. They look identical. There's a few differences. Leonardo 119 is by far my favorite single-engine helicopter that I've worked in. We'll get into that on the next slide, like I said. And then another common single-engine aircraft in helicopter EMS is an A-Star. A-Stars do very well on the higher terrain, higher altitude areas of the world. It's got three main rotor blades, one engine obviously, but it has a very good performance at higher altitude. So programs in Colorado, California choose to fly the A-Star for that. Twin engine helicopters, common ones that you will see throughout the country. Probably the most common twin engine helicopter flown in EMS is an Airbus H135. I'll get into that on the next slide. Bell, Leonardo, Airbus, those are all manufacturers of helicopters. So when you hear those names thrown around, that's like, Ford, Chevy, it's same thing with helicopters, right? So Leonardo 109, I'll show you on the next slide. AW 169 is what's in the slide in the picture here that you're seeing. And then Sikorsky at the bottom, S76, S92. S92s are still made, I believe. I think the S76 is not made anymore, and so those aircraft are slowly starting to go away because they're getting more expensive to maintain and support. So show you more on the next slide. Moving right along, those are my aircraft I fly in now. The aircraft in the back is a Bell 429. It's the bigger brother of a Bell 407, which is the aircraft that's towards the front of the picture. Again, I work for CareFlight out of Dallas-Fort Worth area, and these are our two aircraft that we utilize at our program. So these are the single engine aircraft I was talking about. Let me change my highlighter color. Let's go with black. So like I said, this aircraft right here, Bell 407. If you guys notice, the 407 and the 206 right here look very similar. The main difference is that the 206 has 2 main rotor blades, 407 has 4. The only other difference in the two is the 407 has a bigger engine. It's very much more powerful, and it's also faster than the 206. The fuselage itself, though, is fairly similar. A 407 is only 6 inches wider than a 206 fuselage, like the body of the aircraft, and that is the only difference. The Lifelink aircraft that you see here out of Minnesota, that is the AW119. Again, that guy is my favorite single-engine aircraft. It's fast, it's powerful, good access to your patient. I liked flying in that aircraft quite a bit. Underneath here, this is Cohen's aircraft, the other co-director, that's Trans-Aero A-Star. A little bit wider body than a 206 or a 407. It's got 3 main rotor blades, and again, that aircraft does very well in high altitudes. That's usually why a program chooses to fly that aircraft. Obviously, a single engine aircraft is going to be a little bit cheaper to operate compared to a twin engine aircraft. You think about it, a twin engine is double the fuel burn. They're usually bigger aircraft, which probably means they're more expensive, right? So a lot of programs choose single engine aircraft based on the affordability and the cost to operate. Moving on to twins, the upper right picture here is a H135. Its bigger brother next to that is an H145. Stat Medevac, a lot of you guys up in the Northeast might be familiar with that program. They're in Pennsylvania, kind of that area of the country. Boston Med Flight is an amazing program. We have one of our instructors, Jen Wheeler, is a flight nurse paramedic base manager for Boston Med Flight. They're an incredible program, very high speed medicine. They fly around. That's actually kind of a long story short here. This picture that you guys see is not an H145. It's an EC145, sorry. The difference in the two is that the new 145s have the same tail rotor as the 135, and then they have an extra rotor blade right here for a 5 main rotor blade system, which is getting common on these bigger twin engine aircraft. Gives you more power, more lift. The aircraft, H145, is an amazing aircraft. The Intermountain Life Flight aircraft underneath those, that is a 109 Leonardo aircraft. Again, it's an amazing twin engine aircraft. It's a little bit smaller patient compartment, very similar to the 119 that Lifelink had, but it's fast, it's powerful. That's kind of what Leonardo's known for, is the speed of their aircraft. It was one of my favorite aircraft to fly in. It's a great platform. And then, last but not least, these guys are the beasts of the industry. The Maryland State Police aircraft down in the bottom right is an AW139. That is probably the biggest aircraft used in EMS in the United States. Again, it's very, very popular in Australia, some in the UK. It's known for, being able to do really long flights with a lot of people. It's a school bus of a helicopter. It can take several crew members, 2 patients if they have it set up to be that way. And then it can carry a ton of gas for long ranges. The Trauma Hawk helicopter here next to that, those two actually just retired. They got replaced by AW169s, the little brother of the 139. But those were S-76s, a Sikorsky that stopped making that model of helicopter. They're not supported anymore, so those are kind of starting to fade out into retirement if a program was flying those aircraft. But same thing, they could carry a ton of gas, probably about 4 crew members in the back, if I remember right. It's been a minute since I've seen one in person. But very fast aircraft, very powerful aircraft. So This just kind of gives you an overview of the difference. So the picture on the left is the interior of an AW169. That's Travis County Starflight's aircraft. When we first got the aircraft, this is how we had it set up. We did make several changes to it along the way, but you guys get the point. We could have up to 3 providers in the back, which is not a thing that you can do in any of the single engine aircraft. And then next to that is an Air Evac 206. So you can see the patient is kind of on this litter system here that goes through the tunnel. The feet actually sit next to the pilot. So if you got a pilot that's grossed out by feet, they probably shouldn't fly in a 407 or a 206. You got a ventilator mounted in the middle here with their monitor. This is a fairly old picture. That's a super old MRX Philips monitor, but I digress. You guys can see the difference between the two. And many of you, if you aren't familiar with them already, will see this in our program in person when we go to the conference. This is a Bell 407 interior. Again, you'll see it looks very similar to the 206. You can see that if your patient has had a few too many Whataburgers, they're probably not going to fit in here very awesome. That is definitely the case. The difference usually in a 407 and a 206 is the 407 has a third seat right here. If you remember about 2 minutes ago, I said that you can't fit 3 people into a single engine aircraft. Technically you can, but when I fly in a 407 right now, this seat is ate up by all of my bags and the 10 pounds of crap that we bring with us. And then the 2 providers sit side by side right here. I don't know if I'm going to be curious on the recording if you can see my mouse moving or not, but you can see the ventilator in between the 2 providers. At CareFlight, we fly the medic in this seat here. The reason for that is if an airway needs to be done, which should never be the case, and I'll tell you guys about why I think that is later in the program. But should you need to do an airway on a patient, usually the paramedic is probably the one that's more experienced with airway management. That's why CareFlight sits that way. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I just do what I'm told. Moving on. This is the interior of Lifelinks 119. The patient, you have most of the access to all of the patient here. Their feet from about the knee down kind of fit into a tunnel system back here where I'm squiggling the line. You can see the ventilators hanging from the roof. The monitor lives over here. Radios, pumps, all of that stuff up there, and then your partner and you would sit facing each other while you're taking care of the patient in the 119. Again, it's my favorite single engine aircraft. I don't know why, I just really enjoyed flying in that aircraft when I was working for Lifelink. So this is the interior of the Boston Medflight H145. You guys can see it's got large clamshell doors. It's where you load the patient. It's got its own stretcher, which is worth its weight in gold alone. And then you'll see the pumps and the vent mounted to the sidewall there. So an H145 usually has 3 seats, 2 that face towards the back of the aircraft, and then that one that you guys are seeing there that faces forward. That's usually where the primary provider sits, as they're the one that has best access to the patient. But H145 is by far my favorite helicopter on the market today, just because of its speed, its power. Like I said earlier, having the stretcher that you can load on and unload yourself or with your partner is really worth its weight in gold. Like I was saying, that's pilot, co-pilot seat. This is the AW169 that we flew at Starflight, or Starflight still flies it, but what I flew in when I worked there. The pilot is usually just a single pilot program in the United States usually sits on the right side of the aircraft. And then at Starflight, we flew if there wasn't a patient on board in the co-pilot seat. One of the med crew would sit up here and help the pilot do radio stuff, watch for other aircraft, things like that. But most programs in the country are flying a single pilot program. At CareFlight and our 429s, for whatever reason, the med crew doesn't sit up front. I don't know why that is, but kind of, how we do it. So everybody's a little bit different. Getting back to HEMS. So why helicopters? Why are helicopters such a large part of pre-hospital care and, critical care transport in the country? So probably 2010 and before, helicopter crews, flight clinicians could do certain things, administer certain medications, do procedures that a normal EMS crew could not. Things such as, rapid sequence induction intubations, ultrasound, blood products. All of that stuff usually lived on a helicopter and not on a ground ambulance. And so that was, kind of the point of calling a helicopter, was if you needed that extra level of care. Nowadays, with the advancements in EMS, there's not much I could do on a ground ambulance that I can't do in the helicopter. There is still a caveat to that. Blood programs are expensive. It's very heavily regulated. And so to do that on, a few hundred aircraft instead of a few thousand ambulances, still kind of the way that it works in most of the country. Here in Texas, we are pretty proud of our blood programs. There's a lot of ground agencies that are carrying whole blood. And in Texas, we can do whatever our medical director tells us that, they are cool with us doing. So, very rural state in most of it, but also a very progressive state as far as protocols go, especially here in the Austin area. So in Austin, in Central Texas, most of the time the aircraft is called because they need a fast ride to the hospital, not because of the level of care that we bring. I will argue until I'm blue in the face that flight clinicians are usually probably more experienced and proficient providers in the critical care world, just because, not that we're better than anybody else, don't mistake me for that, but usually every call we go on, we're using those sets of skills versus the ground providers where, 1 in 10 calls they might use a critical care level of medicine. So that's kind of my thought process on that. Happy to sit and argue with you about it if you want to. Texas is also a very rural state, so getting out into the far west parts of the state where it's not as populated, and they can't afford to put a paramedic on every ambulance like they can in the cities here. Helicopters are often used as an ALS or above resource, right? So you have 2 EMTs running around on a truck, or even just a driver in an EMT. That is where helicopters are used, kind of in the rural areas that don't have the funding or the population of advanced life support providers to work in the field. Helicopters are used a ton in those scenarios. And then obviously the kind of duh factor is the time-sensitive injuries, your strokes, your STEMIs, your trauma patients. Those are kind of the obvious choices for helicopter transport. In the Austin area, kind of what we've taught to the ground providers is that if your ground transport is going to take more than an hour with that kind of patient, then you should consider air transport. Again, it's different in every part of the country, but that's kind of what goes on around here. So almost 50 million Americans live more than an hour away from a level 1 or 2 trauma center. Trauma is obviously still a super high leading cause of death in the country. Rural patients are almost twice as likely to die from trauma than an urban population. This is very kind of common sense. If you live 2 hours away from a trauma center versus 20 minutes away from a trauma center, it's just, like I said, very common sense. The odds are stacked against you for, getting to a surgeon or any type of higher care when you live that far out. Rural hospitals, especially nowadays, you see a lot of these critical access hospitals shutting down because of funding. They just lack the resources. They don't have surgeons. And if they do have surgeons, they're not well-equipped surgeons to take care of, these super sick trauma patients or stroke patients. Most of them, obviously, a critical access hospital is a stabilize and transfer to one of the specialty centers, and air medical plays a huge role in that in the United States. And then obviously you have the scene flight care that we just talked about a little bit. The blood products, usually most aircraft in the country are carrying blood at this point. If they are not, they are 10 years behind the times, and that's a real bummer. But here in Texas, I don't know of any aircraft that are not carrying either packed red blood cells and plasma, or most of us now are carrying low titer OPAS whole blood. Most of the aircraft or helicopter services have advanced level airway management that they can do. Obviously, ventilators on every aircraft. I will fight you until I'm blue in the face about ventilators being better than a BVM any day. And you're going to have to sit through me and Cohen giving you a vent talk here in the next few weeks. Anyways, and then obviously it saves patient time. Right, so here in Austin, we live in what we call the hill country towards the west of the city, and a drive that would take me an hour and a half on the ground takes me 15 minutes in helicopter because of our geography here. So obviously that's a pretty significant time saving. Getting into who you guys would be working with when you get a flight job. Obviously, you need a pilot to get where you're going, or a driver if you're going to be doing ground. Pilots usually, and CareFlight kind of disproved this for me, but up until I started working for CareFlight, most of my pilots had a military background. And the sole reason for that was because of the amount of hours required to apply to be an EMS pilot. They're not landing at an airport every time. They're landing on, highways and roads and fields that are, a little bit more of an at-risk landing area. Again, if I didn't edit that part of the slide, which is my bad, but when I worked at Starflight, they required their pilots to have 3,000 hours, which, if you think about it, is equivalent to you having to drive in your car, actively driving for 3,000 hours, right? That's what they have to fly in the aircraft. So it takes a considerable amount of years to get that time built up. Like I said earlier in the presentation, most of the helicopter EMS operators in the United States are single pilot operators. Few are starting to get into a dual pilot configuration, and obviously dual pilot is, in my opinion, safer than single pilot, just because you have, obviously two sets of hands that are operating that aircraft. Most of the pilots that work for the programs that you guys are going to work for will be instrument flight rules qualified. What that means is if you should fly into the clouds in an aircraft that's not meant to fly in clouds, the pilot is trained to safely operate that aircraft using the instruments on board. That is an emergency technically, and we'll get into that, later down the road. But all of them carry an FAA Part 135 carrier certificate, same as if you were to go jump on a Delta flight or a Southwest flight or a, whatever flight going to Mexico. The same certificate that the pilots flying the airliners have is the same certificate that your pilot of the helicopter would have to have. Getting into you nurses, 3 to 5 years of ICU or ER experience. If you are an ER nurse that has no ICU experience, I recommend that you transfer to the ICU as soon as possible. The reason that we fly flight nurse and flight paramedic is because of the scene volume versus the IFT volume, or the interfacility transfer volume, that we do in the air medical world. A nurse showing up at a car wreck is probably not going to be as comfortable as the paramedic, and vice versa. You walk into an ICU level transfer with a patient that's on 8 different drips. The paramedic, if they're a newer paramedic, is probably going to be shaking in their boots, right? Not used to that kind of thing. So we play on the skills of each. Nobody's better than the other, in my opinion. ICU nurses versus partners that I've had that are just ER nurses, I tend to appreciate working with the ICU nurses a little bit better, not because of anything other than their skill set. Not trying to bash ER nurse experience, right? But that's kind of the medic's world, is the emergency response, stabilize, and then pass off to somebody else. The ICU nurses tend to hang out with their patients for days, weeks, and get used to that level of a little bit higher medicine, doing the drips and the vents and the stuff like that the ER nurses don't tend to usually get a ton of experience with. Not saying that you don't bite my head off when we talk on Monday. I love my ER nurses just as much. But as far as partners go, that ICU experience tends to be pretty beneficial. Go out and get your specialty certifications. So get your CCRN, CFRN. If you're an EMT or a paramedic, you can fly in. Well, if you're a paramedic, you can fly in both seats, which makes you very, very valuable to a flight program. Dual certification is something that I wish I would have done a long time ago, and I didn't for whatever reason. But go out and get you a paramedic license as well. Also, go out and get a paramedic job, right? Don't just get the certification and the patch. Go through the school and check the box. Like, go out and work as a paramedic on an ambulance. Get that, pre-hospital experience would be invaluable to you. All the alphabet letter soup stuff that you guys, had to have to get into the program, or will have to have by the end of it. And then, I already talked about why we fly medic nurse. Some programs fly nurse. Usually the programs that fly nurse will make their nurses also be paramedics. Care Flight is one of those. So at Care Flight, all of our nurses have to also be paramedics within, I think it's 18 months or 2 years of getting hired. Mayo Clinic up in Minnesota, their aircraft based out of the actual Mayo Clinic is a nurse aircraft. But they are also both dual certified. So many of them started as paramedics, right? Went to nursing school. So I would highly recommend that, especially for you younger kids. Go back to school. If you're a paramedic, go and get your RN. And if you're an RN, go to paramedic school. Go to a real paramedic school. And I will tell you more about that if you want me to. Just ask. For the paramedics in the bunch, same thing, 3 to 5 years, busy 911 system. If you're working for a transfer service, which I don't think any of you guys that have applied and got in this year are in this boat. We did a pretty good job of weeding through, all the apps, but if you work at only a transfer service to where you're not doing any 911 response, I would go out and get a 911 job, because the transfer world is not probably going to get you a flight job unless you're working for a flight service that also has a ground component. Excuse me. There are several critical care paramedic courses that are starting to pop up throughout the country, which is awesome to see. Obviously, if you can take your FPC exam, go and get that done. I will say just because you pass the FPC or the CCPC, the Critical Care Paramedic Certified Test, does not make you a critical care paramedic. Congrats, you can pass a test, and that's awesome for you, but that does not yet mean that you're a critical care paramedic. Again, ask me about it. I'll sit at the table with the Change My Mind banner hanging in front of it. Usually it's a more competitive spot to get within the HEMS industry just because the nurses have so many different avenues of nursing that they can go into. Paramedics, it just kind of, you get what you get. You're a 911 medic. You can be a fire medic, right? You can be a SWAT medic. You can do rescue stuff. But you're really just kind of, community medicine kind of changed, or paramedicine changed this for us a little bit. But, no harm meant to the community health folks out there. I find that to be an incredibly boring job. So the ones that do enjoy it are definitely a special breed, and we need them around, and that's amazing. But to come back out of my little rabbit hole that I'm in, being a flight paramedic is usually kind of the top of the options that we have available to us within the EMS industry, which is why most of us go on to nursing school or PA school, right? So obviously the medic has a long history of airway management and intubation that's not usually done by the nurses in a hospital. And then we have, a cardiology strength with 12 leads and stuff that usually isn't taught to the nurses in school. After you start flying for probably about the 5-year mark, there is no difference between a 5-year flight paramedic and a 5-year flight nurse in my mind. Both disciplines should be equal strength in all aspects of patient care when you get to that point. Again, that's my kind of opinion on it. Everywhere, every program is different. Some states don't allow paramedics to do things, and some states don't allow nurses to do things. So it's just kind of is what it is, right? So that's my take on those two. Where to work. So obviously you guys are probably all familiar with the programs that are around where you live right now. For those of you that maybe aren't tied down to a specific area, I will tell you that right now is a good time to be in your shoes looking for a flight position. COVID really messed up the EMS world as far as vacancies and stuff like that, especially in the flight world. So why would I make $40 an hour on an aircraft as a nurse when I could go back to the hospital and make double or triple that an hour? That happened to a lot of people. We're starting to see that kind of come back to normal now that COVID is, knock on wood, mostly over. But usually the nurses can make a significant amount more an hour in the hospital. And several nurses did leave the field to go back to a travel assignment or back to an ICU for the insane money that was being paid out. The really kind of the hard truth, and I will stand on a soapbox and throw rocks all day long. I work for a not-for-profit. We're here to take care of patients and do good medicine, not make our investors rich. The for-profits like GMR, PHI, Air Methods, unfortunately, are owned by investor groups that are looking to, make a significant profit off of transporting that patient. It's a double-sided fence. The insurance companies in the United States are not helping our case whatsoever. I'll get into this in a minute. Helicopters are expensive to fly. You guys are going to be expensive to pay for and pay for your benefits when you get the flight job. And so, charging an insane amount of money for a transport is unfortunately where the industry is gone. And there's several political reasons behind that, not just the investor part of it. There's a lot of folks that are uninsured, and to recoup the cost from flying that patient, we have to charge those that are insured an insane amount of money to just break even, right? So if you want to get into the politics of it and the, kind of the bummer of the situation that it is, happy to talk more about that, but it's kind of the hard truth, like I say in the slideshow. So of most important when you guys are choosing a place to work, their safety record, and even more importantly, to me anyways, and safety's always third, number one. But crew cohesion is the most important part of where I choose to work. So find a program with a strong safety system in place. Really not many programs nowadays that don't have a good safety system in place. Accidents do happen, but you really can't be accredited in the United States if you don't have a good safety program in place. So that's why crew being family to me is more important than safety, because safety to me is just a given and an expectation. Crew being family and cohesiveness is not necessarily always the case. So for me, when I was the hiring manager at Starflight, obviously I looked for good clinicians, but I also, more important to me, was hiring somebody that I knew was going to get along with the group, was going to work hard for the system, and was going to, be somebody that I would want to show up and work with myself. So be that person. You should be a good candidate for wherever you guys are showing up to work. Unfortunately, in the air medical world, competition and marketing is a huge part of it. It's a huge part of what you will do. You need to be nice to the people that are calling you, no matter how hard they are trying to kill that patient. You have to walk in and smile and pat them on the back and give them fist bumps, because if you're a jerk, they're just going to call the other helicopter on the other corner across the street from you. So if you want a job, I'd be nice to your people that are calling you. A lot of places call those people customers. I don't like that. I call the people that call me on the helicopter my partners, because that's what they are. Not all partners are created equal. You guys probably know that by now, but it's a huge, huge part of what you do. If you have a bad attitude and you're a jerk to somebody, they're not going to call you. And it's a real thing that happens. So check your ego at the door. We don't have time for it. All right. Obviously, safety is a big deal. Weather is going to be something that you guys are going to learn a lot about in this program. Most of the fatal crashes in the country are caused by bad weather. I often hear about how dangerous helicopter EMS is. I always have felt more safe in the helicopter than I ever did flying 85 miles an hour down a highway waiting for some jerk to, run a red light. That's my opinion. You can find people that will argue with that. No big deal. That's where I stand on it. If you're uncomfortable at any point of any part of a call while you're flying, speak up. I can't tell you how many times some thought is going through my head and I'm just sitting there being like, let's sit and watch it for a little while longer. That is dangerous. The minute I speak up, my partner is usually like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Let's turn this thing around and go home. It happens all the time. So you guys being new to the industry, please ask questions. I don't know you guys yet, and I'm sure some of you will probably find a way to ask some stupid questions, and that's okay. There is such a thing as a stupid question, but it's still okay to ask it. If it's a question that you have going through your mind, please speak up. And then last but not least, 3 to go, 1 to say no. You have a veto rule. So while you guys are getting into this industry, if you are not comfortable going on the flight, if there's a tornado out the back door and the other two are like, yeah, let's go, and you don't want to go, you speak up and you say, no, I'm not going, don't go on the flight. They're not going to leave without you. And maybe we'll talk about something later, but probably not. If you're uncomfortable, speak up. 51% rule, we call it. Do not go on the flight if you're not comfortable with it. And you guys will get this drilled into you. Much deeper dive into the safety stuff later on in the program. Modes of transport, like I said, it's not always all about the helicopters. Rotor wing, usually 2 hours or less. Rotor wing is a helicopter. Fixed wing, wings are for ferries. No, sorry, I think I'm funny. Anyways, fixed wings, the jets and the airplanes are for longer distances, usually interstate, or, one state across the country, or even international. Some of the programs in the country will go to Canada quite often. They'll go to Mexico. They'll go to the Caribbean, you name it, to pick up, U.S. nationals that are on vacation. And then ground ambulance. Care Flight, where I work, has a really big ground component to our service. I did a 9-hour ECMO Impella call a few weeks ago by ground because the weather was bad. So just because you're a flight paramedic or a flight nurse does not necessarily mean that you're not going to have a little bit of a ground pound situation. And some of you working for Duke Life Flight, you guys have a huge ground component. Boston Med Flight has a huge ground service, part of their critical care transport program. So very beneficial piece of critical care. I worked for Lifelink for a whopping 6 months. Lifelink is Lifelink 3 technically. It's an amazing service out of Minnesota and Wisconsin. This is their fixed wing that they flew up there. It's a Pilatus PC-12. Very cool aircraft. I took care of some very sick people in the back of that aircraft while I worked there. PC-12 is a very common aircraft that is used EMS fixed wing. Another one that you will hear is a King Air. I'm kind of partial to the PC-12. It's got bigger doors. You can load a little bit easier in, but I digress. We'll get into that more later on. Ground transport, there is Boston Med Flight's critical care ground ambulance. It's a huge ambulance. Usually they have a 3-person crew, so they're doing a flight nurse, flight medic. Sometimes on the ground they'll grab an RT. If they're doing neonatal stuff with the isolettes, they'll throw a nurse practitioner in there from the NICU, usually a registered nurse with that stuff. ECMOs will take perfusionists with us, you name it. So you can usually fit a few more people in the back of an ambulance because weight isn't such an issue when you're driving around on the ground. All right, getting into IFR, like I said, we're going to do this a little bit more in depth later on in the program. Most IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules. So every time you jump onto your Delta flight, that aircraft is flying Instrument Flight Rules, meaning the GPS and the computer system within the aircraft are so redundant and reliable that you can rely on those instruments to safely fly from point A to point B, regardless of what it looks like outside. Some helicopters can do that. Usually it's a twin-engine aircraft. Bell just came out with a 407 that's qualified or rated is what we call it to fly instrument flight rules. It's got some backup hydraulic systems, backup systems within the aircraft that will allow it to fly IFR. And then the 119 from Leonardo that Lifelink flies, they also came out with an IFR rated single engine aircraft to fly IFR. Most of the other IFR aircraft are twin engines because of the FAA rules that surround that. Some aircraft, some programs can fly what's called a GPS precision approach. So when you fly IFR, usually that means you're flying from an airport to another airport. Very, very select few amount of programs in the country have GPS approaches into an actual hospital. And we'll get into kind of what the rules and regulations are behind that stuff later. Hospital-based programs. So hospital systems figured out that if they have a helicopter that brings them trauma patients, they can make a lot of money off those trauma patients, right? So early to late 90s, a lot of hospital programs started to spin up a helicopter program for that reason. They would funnel patients back into the mothership hospital. That has since kind of gone away. Usually they're a not-for-profit, meaning they're more so on the high-speed protocol levels. Their education is usually pretty advanced and progressive. Usually they have a specialty team associated with that flight service, so a lot of high-risk OB, neonatal transports, ECMO, stuff like that. And then community-based is the most common model within the United States. So the Air Evac Life Teams, the PHI, MedTrans, Air Methods, all of those services plop a helicopter where they think a helicopter is needed, and they're not tied to any one specific health system. That being said, there are contracts in place in a lot of places in the country where these different programs will sign contracts with different healthcare networks. They'll, plaster the healthcare networks logos all over the side of the helicopter. But the crews, the pilots, the medics, the nurses, and the mechanics work for the vendor of the aircraft, not the actual hospital, is a fairly common thing that we see. You have third service providers. This is like Travis County Starflight, where I worked prior to CareFlight. It's taxpayer funded. Usually these systems do things like firefighting and hoist rescue, law enforcement, stuff like that. It's a true public mission asset. These programs, and really the reason why I left Starflight, is they aren't usually generally high-speed critical care providers. They're usually kind of more focused on doing the public mission stuff that they do. Arizona State Troopers, obviously all those guys are cops, law enforcement officers, and so their main mission is supporting the other troopers. They are also paramedics. They do have some paramedics that work for them that are not sworn officers. Their sole job is to be a medic on the aircraft. But like I said, most of these, the LA County fires, the big cities in California that have their own fire department helicopters, usually don't get into that for the medicine. It's more of the other stuff that they do, but kind of biased. I had my experience that I'm sure you guys will hear about at Starflight that kind of is unique. So, all right, we're getting close to the end. you guys have listened to me for an hour, so I apologize. But what does the future look like? If you guys haven't heard by now, the No Surprises Act is putting a significant damper on the helicopter EMS industry. The way that they set up the insurance reimbursements through the No Surprises Act, even though I agree with a lot of what the No Surprises Act did or intended to do, it has also really kind of had some negative effects as well. So reimbursement for the flights that we go on are getting delayed. They're getting caught up in arbitration processes, which means we don't have money, which means that we can't operate, right? So lots of political stuff going on with that in our world right now. Really isn't anything to be worried about for the most part. We'll get into this later on down the road, but you guys should really probably be pretty safe to make a good decision about where you're going to go work by the time you're done with Future Flight Crew, and you'll be knowledgeable on the questions to ask to make sure that you're going into a base that's going to be sustainable and not going anywhere anytime soon. So some of the good things that did come of that is the programs that are doing higher speed medicine, flying the dual engine bigger IFR aircraft, doing ECMO level medicine, stuff like that, are going to be hopefully reimbursed more than like an Air Evac Life Team that's just kind of doing the bare bones. I started at Air Evac. It's no shade thrown at them right now. They're very valuable for what the purpose they serve within our industry is. That being said, flying a 206 versus flying an H-145 is usually a little bit different level of service. So there is talk of being reimbursed for that level of service later on down the road. And then I've also heard that outcomes are going to be tied to some things. I don't agree with that because, I could do my best job, best day I've ever had, the best medicine I've ever practiced on a patient, done everything in my power to take care of that patient, and they could still pass away. That's really kind of, I don't think, a good metric to use, but I digress. We'll get into that, a little bit more. So, like I said, we're right at an hour. Sorry you guys had to listen to my monotone voice for that amount of time, but here we are. Write down your questions. Hopefully you were writing down questions as we went. Bring these up next Monday when we talk. And then, as always, you guys feel free to email me, text me, post questions in Google Classroom, and we will get to them when it's time to do so. So, hope you have a good day, a good night, wherever you're watching this, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.